The Galactic Concord had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and in all that time, they had never once been wrong, or so they believed with every fiber of their ancient beings. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood in the center of the grand assembly chamber, surrounded by crystalline spires that reached toward an artificial sky painted with the light of 1,000 distant suns. And she felt very small and very angry and very human. The chamber was filled with delegates from species older than human civilization itself. Creatures who had mastered faster than light travel, while humans were still learning to make fire. Beings who looked upon humanity the way a professor might look upon a child who had wandered into a university lecture by mistake. The Allery delegate sat in his floating throne, his bioluminescent frills pulsing with soft blue light that Elena had learned to recognize as amusement. The kind of amusement one feels when watching something foolish try to be serious. His name was High Counselor Vareth, and he had been dismissing human concerns for the past 3 hours with the patience of someone explaining basic mathematics to a particularly slow student. Ambassador Vasquez, Vareth said, his voice carrying through the chamber like wind chimes in a storm. We understand your species is concerned about the Varax incursions, but you must understand that the Concord has dealt with such matters for millennia before your kind learned to walk upright. Elena's hands tightened on the datapad she held, her knuckles going white as she forced herself to remain calm, to speak in the measured tones that diplomacy required even when every instinct screamed at her to shout, High Counselor, with respect, the Varax have consumed 3 of our outer colonies in the past 6 months, she said, her voice steady despite the fire burning in her chest. That is 47 million human lives lost, while this assembly debated whether to form a committee to discuss the possibility of maybe considering a response. A pause. Ripple of what might have been laughter moved through the chamber, though the sounds were alien and strange to human ears. The Thelian delegate, a massive creature that resembled a walking mountain of stone and moss, rumbled something in its own language before the translator caught up. Young species always believe their problems are unique, the Thelian said. The Varax have risen and fallen many times throughout galactic history, and they will fade again as they always do, and patience is the weapon of the wise. Elena wanted to scream at them, wanted to grab the ancient stone creature by whatever passed for its shoulders and shake it until it understood that patience meant nothing to the families being devoured alive on distant worlds instead. She took a breath and continued her presentation, pulling up holographic images of the destruction the Varax had left behind, worlds stripped bare, oceans drained, entire ecosystems reduced to barren rock. The swarm is not fading, Elena said, pointing to the data scrolling across the display. Our analysts have tracked their expansion rate, and it is accelerating, and if current projections hold, they will reach the populated systems of the Inner Rim within 18 months. High Counselor Vareth's frills flickered with what Elena now recognized as annoyance. A pale orange glow replacing the blue, human analysts, he said, as though the word itself was an insult. Your species has been part of the galactic community for barely 3 centuries, Ambassador, and in that time, you have shown a remarkable talent for seeing threats where none exist and proposing violence as a solution to problems that require wisdom. 47 million dead is not a problem that requires wisdom. Elena shot back, her composure finally cracking. It is a problem that requires action, and every day this assembly delays, more of my people die. The chamber fell silent, and Elena knew she had made a mistake, knew that raising her voice in the Grand Assembly was considered the height of barbarism among these ancient species who prided themselves on their emotional control. The Allori delegate leaned forward, his frills now a deep purple that Elena did not recognize. This is precisely why humanity remains a provisional member of the Concord, Vareth said, his voice soft but carrying a weight of condescension that made Elena's blood boil. You lack the temperament for galactic governance, Ambassador. And your species' history of warfare and conflict demonstrates that you have not yet evolved beyond your primitive instincts. Elena stared at him, and something shifted inside her. Something that had been building for years of diplomatic missions where humans were patted on the head and told to be patient. Years of watching her people's concerns dismissed by species who had forgotten what it meant to fight for survival. We came to you for help, Elena said, her voice now eerily calm. We came to the Concord because we believed that together, the species of this galaxy could protect each other, could stand united against threats that none of us could face alone. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates from a dozen different species, all of them watching her with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. We asked you to authorize a joint military response, she continued. We asked for ships, for weapons, for the support that the Concord Charter promises to all member species facing existential threats. High Counselor Verath waved a slender hand, his gesture dismissive in a way that transcended species and culture. And we have explained repeatedly that the Concord does not engage in military action based on the fears of a single member species, he said. The proper procedure is to form an investigative committee, which will spend the necessary time, perhaps a decade, perhaps two, studying the situation before making recommendations to the full assembly. A decade, Elena repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. In a decade. The Varax will have consumed 100 worlds, High Counselor, and there will be no humans left to benefit from your committee's recommendations. The Thelian delegate rumbled again, and the translator rendered its words with mechanical precision. Humans have always been dramatic, and this is known throughout the galaxy, and perhaps when your species matures, you will learn that the universe does not revolve around your concerns. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, something had changed in her expression, something that made the nearest delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. She picked up her datapad, tucking it under her arm with the careful precision of someone who had made a decision and would not be moved from it. I understand, Elena said, her voice carrying through the chamber with a clarity that silenced the murmuring delegates. The Galactic Concord will not help humanity defend itself against the Varax swarm. And that is the official position of this assembly, High Counselor. Varath's frills flickered with what might have been uncertainty. Though he quickly composed himself, the Concord will address the situation through proper channels, he said. In time, Elena nodded slowly, and then she smiled a smile that had no warmth in it. A smile that showed teeth in a way that made the Allery delegate's frills go pale. Fine, she said, her voice quiet but somehow filling every corner of the massive chamber. We will handle it ourselves then. She turned and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence, and she did not look back behind her. The delegates exchanged glances, some amused, some puzzled, some feeling the first stirrings of an emotion they could not quite name. High Counselor Verath let out what passed for a laugh among his species. His frills returning to their normal blue. Humans, he said, shaking his head, always so theatrical, and always so certain that they can do what older and wiser species cannot. The chamber filled with the sounds of agreement, delegates returning to their discussions of trade, agreements and cultural exchanges, and all the mundane matters that filled their ancient lives. None of them noticed the human ambassador pause at the door, her hand resting on the frame for just a moment. None of them saw the look in her eyes, the look of someone who had asked nicely, been refused, and was now prepared to do whatever was necessary. None of them understood what they had just unleashed, but they would learn, and the lesson would be written in fire across the stars. And the galaxy would never forget the day humanity stopped asking for permission and started taking action. Elena Vasquez walked out of the Grand Assembly and did not look back. And behind her, The oldest and wisest species in the known universe continued their debates, utterly unaware that they had just made the greatest mistake in galactic history. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, waiting for what would come next. The message traveled at faster than light speeds across human space, reaching every colony, every station, every ship within hours of Ambassador Vasquez's departure from the Grand Assembly. It was a simple message. Just 3 words that every human citizen had been taught since childhood. 3 words that meant the time for talking was over, and the time for action had begun. Protocol Prometheus active on the colony world of New Brisbane. A factory that had spent decades producing agricultural equipment suddenly shut down its public operations. And workers who had been building tractors the day before found themselves assembling weapons platforms and armor plating on Mars. The great shipyards that officially constructed civilian transport vessels revealed their true purpose as massive. Blast doors opened to show warships that had been under construction in secret for generations. Ships designed not for exploration or trade, but for one purpose only worn on Earth itself. In cities and towns across the birth world of humanity, our ETIRED soldiers received a notification on their personal devices, a notification that many had never expected to see in their lifetimes. We need you. Fleet Admiral Marcus Chen was 73 years old, and he had been enjoying his retirement on a small farm in what used to be called Montana, growing vegetables and pretending that he did not miss the stars when the notification arrived. He was sitting on his porch watching the sunset, and he stared at those 3 simple words for a long moment before a smile spread across his weathered face. He had always known this day would come, had always known that humanity's place in the galaxy was not as secure as the politicians liked to pretend, and he had spent his retirement not just growing tomatoes, but studying, preparing, waiting. Within an hour, he was on a shuttle heading to the orbital command station. And within a day, he was standing in the war room surrounded by officers half his age, all of them looking to him for guidance. "Show me everything we have on the Vorax," Chum said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets in battles that most of these young officers had only read about in history books. The holographic display came alive with data images of the swarm's bioships, analysis of their attack patterns, reports from the destroyed colonies that detailed exactly how the Vorax consumed their prey. Studied the information with the cold, calculating eye of a predator, assessing its competition, and slowly, a plan began to form in his mind. "They are not intelligent in the way we understand intelligence," he said, pointing to the swarm patterns displayed before him. "They operate on instinct, driven by hunger and guided by their hive queens, and that makes them predictable." His aide, a young commander named Sarah Park, stepped forward with additional data. "Our scientists have been studying captured Vorax specimens for years," she said. "We know their weaknesses. Their bioships are vulnerable to extreme heat. Their communication relies on pheromone signals that can be disrupted. And most importantly, they cannot resist the electromagnetic signature of masked prey animals." Chun nodded slowly, the pieces of his strategy falling into place like a puzzle he had been solving his entire life. "They think we are prey," he said. "They think we will run and hide and wait for the Concorde to save us, just like every other young species they have encountered." He turned to face his officers, and there was something in his eyes that made even the most battle-hardened among them straighten their spines. "We are going to teach them what happens when prey decides to become the predator across human space." The mobilization continued at a pace that would have been impossible for any other species in the galaxy. Humans did not sleep, did not rest, did not stop for the debates and discussions that paralyzed the Concorde, and they worked with a singular focus that their galactic neighbors would have found terrifying if they had bothered to pay attention. Engineers who had spent their careers designing luxury spacecraft now designed weapons of war. adapting civilian technology for military purposes with a creativity that came from generations of conflict and survival scientists who had studied the Varaks out of academic curiosity, now worked to find ways to kill them, developing biological agents and chemical weapons and devices that the Concord had banned centuries ago for being too cruel on soldiers. Thousands upon thousands of them, trained day and night in simulations designed to prepare them for the nightmare of fighting an enemy that felt no fear and knew no mercy. Meanwhile, in the halls of the Galactic Concord, the delegates continued their endless debates. Blissfully unaware of the storm that was gathering, High Counselor Vareth received reports of increased activity in human space, but he dismissed them with the casual arrogance that had defined his species for millennia. They are probably building more of those primitive defense stations, he said to his aides, his frills flickering with amusement. Let them waste their resources on such foolishness. And when the Varak's threat fades on its own, as it always does, the humans will learn that patience is the true path to survival. The Thelian delegate was slightly more concerned, noting that human shipping patterns had changed dramatically in recent weeks. They are moving resources toward the outer rim. The great stone creature rumbled. Resources that should be going to their core worlds for protection. But the Concords' military advisors assured them that there was nothing to worry about. That human military capability was negligible compared to the forces the elder species could bring to bear if they chose to. They have perhaps 200 combat-capable vessels, the advisor said, his tone dismissive. The Vorak swarm numbers in the thousands. And even if the humans were foolish enough to engage, they would be destroyed in hours. Back in human space, Admiral Chun stood before a holographic display showing the full strength of humanity's hidden fleet, not 200 ships, but over 2,000, built in secret over generations by a species that had never truly trusted the promises of the Concord. The Alari think we are children playing at war, Chun said to his assembled commanders. They think we lack the strength and the will to fight. He activated another display, showing the weapon systems that human scientists had developed, weapons that violated every treaty the Concord had ever written. Weapons designed not to wound or capture, but to utterly annihilate. They have forgotten something important about humans. Chun continued, his voice hard as steel. They have forgotten that we did not reach the stars by being patient, and we did not survive our own history by being kind. Commander Park stepped forward, her expression troubled. Admiral, the weapons we are preparing, the biological agents, the antimatter munitions, the Concord will condemn us if we use them, and we could face sanctions, isolation, even military action from the elder species. Chun turned to look at her, and there was no anger in his eyes, only a weariness that came from carrying the weight of impossible decisions. Commander, the Voraks have killed 47 million of our people, and they will kill billions more if we do not stop them, he said. The Concord has made it clear that they will not help us, that they consider our lives less valuable than their precious rules and procedures. He looked around the room at the faces of men and women who had sworn to protect humanity, who had dedicated their lives to a cause greater than themselves. When this is over, the galaxy can judge us however it wishes, Chun said. But our people will be alive to hear that judgment, and that is all that matters. The preparations continued through the following weeks, and with each passing day, the human war machine grew stronger, and more terrible soldiers memorized the weaknesses of their enemy. Engineers perfected weapons that would have given the Concord nightmares, and commanders planned operations that would have been considered war crimes by galactic standards. And through it all, Ambassador Elena Vasquez worked the diplomatic channels, not to seek help. That ship had sailed, but to keep the other species distracted, to make them believe that humanity had accepted its fate and was simply preparing a desperate doomed. Defenshi attended conferences and smiled at delegates who had dismissed her people's cries for help, and she assured them that humans understood their place in the galactic order, that they would not cause any trouble. None of them saw the steel behind her smile, the cold fury that burned in her heart every time an Allori delegate offered condolences for the unfortunate situation in human space. The galaxy thought it knew what humans were capable of, thought it understood this young and primitive species that had stumbled into the stars. They were about to learn how wrong they were, and the lesson would be one that no species would ever forget. The day of reckoning was coming, and humanity was ready. The Virax swarm arrived at Helion 4 on a Tuesday. Not that the day of the week mattered to creatures that measured time only in feeding cycles and the endless hunger that drove them. Across the stars, 3,000 bioships darkened the sky above the colony world, each one a living nightmare of chitinous armor and organic weapon systems, each one carrying thousands of drones ready to descend upon the planet and consume every living thing they found. The colonists had been evacuated weeks ago, moved to safer systems in an operation that the Concord observers had mocked as panic-driven hysteria. But the planet was not empty. Admiral Marcus Chun stood on the bridge of the flagship Indomitable, watching the swarm approach on the tactical display. And he felt something he had not felt in decades: anticipation. All ships report ready. Admiral, Commander Park announced from her station, her voice steady despite the impossible odds displayed on every screen around them. Chun nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the approaching swarm. "Begin Phase 1, he said. "Launch the lure from the belly of the fleet." A flotilla of converted cargo ships accelerated toward the Virax. Their hull was modified with devices that broadcast electromagnetic signatures, carefully designed to mimic the neural activity of billions of terrified prey animals. The human scientists had spent years studying captured Virax specimens, learning exactly what signals triggered their feeding frenzy, what frequencies made their instincts override whatever passed for rational thought in their hive minds. The effect was immediate and devastating, not to the humans, but to the swarm itself. The Virax bioships that had been moving in coordinated attack formations suddenly broke apart, abandoning their carefully planned assault as the overwhelming scent of fear and prey overwhelmed their senses. Thousands of ships converged on the lower flotilla, fighting each other for position, crashing into one another in their desperate hunger to reach the source of that irresistible signal. "Phase 1 successful," Park reported, her voice carrying a note of grim satisfaction. "The swarm has lost formation coherence, and they are clustered exactly where we wanted them." Chun allowed himself a small smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Begin Phase 2, he ordered. "Deploy the gravity wells across the battlefield." Human warships launched devices that the Concord had banned 3,000 years ago, gravity well generators that created artificial singularities, trapping everything within their range in an inescapable prison of warped spacetime. The Virax bioships that had clustered around the lure suddenly found themselves unable to move, their organic engines straining against forces that no living creature could overcome. "Phase 2 successful," Park announced. "Approximately 40% of the swarm is caught in the gravity wells." "Good," Chun said, his voice cold. "Now we show them what happens when you threaten humanity." He turned to the weapons officer, a young man whose hands were steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to unleash. "Deploy the Purifier." The Purifier was humanity's darkest creation, a bioweapon engineered specifically to target Virax cellular structure, designed to spread through their bioships like wildfire and dissolve them from the inside out. It had taken human scientists 15 years to develop, working in secret laboratories that the Concord did not know existed, driven by the knowledge that someday, somewhere, humanity would need a weapon that could end a species. The canisters launched from 100 human warships, piercing the chitinous hulls of the trapped Vorax bioships and releasing their payload into the organic vessels. For a moment, Nothing seemed to happen. And then the screaming began. The Varax did not scream with voices. They had no mouths capable of such sounds, but their death throes echoed through this electromagnetic spectrum. A psychic howl of agony that every species in the system could feel, like ice water poured directly into their brains. Bioships that had terrorized 100 worlds began to dissolve, their organic structures breaking down as the purifier spread through their systems, turning the weapons of the swarm into puddles of biological waste. "My God," whispered one of the bridge officers. Watching the destruction on the tactical display, Admiral Chun did not look away. "God has nothing to do with this," he said quietly. "This is what humans do when we are pushed too far. And this is what happens when the galaxy ignores our warnings." The battle, if it could even be called that, continued for 6 brutal hours. Human warships moved through the chaos of the dying swarm, their weapon systems targeting any bioships that had escaped the gravity wells and the purifier, hunting them down with methodical precision. Antimatter munitions vaporized targets by the dozen. Plasma lances cut through chitinous armor like hot knives through butter, and kinetic weapons shattered bioships into fragments that tumbled through the void. The Varax, for the first time in their existence as a species, experienced something their hive mind had never processed: defeat, not in a single engagement, but total and complete annihilation. 2,000 bioships were destroyed in the first 3 hours. And by the 6th hour, the remaining third of the swarm had begun to retreat, fleeing the battlefield in desperate disarray. "Do we pursue, Admiral?" Commander Park asked, her face pale from the carnage she had witnessed. Chun was silent for a long moment, watching the fleeing remnants of the swarm on his display. "No," he said finally. "Let them go. Let them return to their hive queens and tell them what happened here. Let them spread the word that humanity is not prey." He turned to face his crew, men and women who had just participated in the largest military victory in human history, and his expression was not one of triumph, but of solemn determination. "This is not the end," he said. "This is the beginning, and we have shown the Varax that we can defeat them. But now we must show the galaxy that we will not stop until humanity is safe." The news of the Battle of Helion 4 spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel, carried by communication networks that hummed with disbelief and shock. The Galactic Concord demanded explanations, sending formal protests about the use of banned weapons and unauthorized military action. High Counselor Varath's message was particularly scathing, condemning humanity for its barbaric tactics and demanding that Admiral Chun be turned over to Concord authorities for war crimes tribunals. Chun's response was broadcast on every channel, ensuring that every species in the galaxy would hear his words. The Galactic Concord had 12,000 years to deal with the Varax threat, and in all that time, you did nothing but watch as species after species was consumed by the swarm, Chun said, his voice carrying across the stars. "Humanity asked for your help, and you refused. You told us to be patient. You told us that our concerns were the panicked fears of a primitive species." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was hard as iron. 47 million of our people died while you debated, High Counselor. 47 million human beings who trusted that the Concord would protect them as it promised. And you failed them. You failed us. And now you dare to lecture us about barbarism? The Admiral leaned forward, his eyes burning with cold fury. "You wanted diplomacy, and we wanted our people alive, and one of us got what we wanted. And if the Concord has a problem with how humanity defends itself, then the Concord is welcome to try and stop us." The transmission ended, leaving the galaxy in stunned silence on 100 different worlds. Species that had suffered under Concord indifference began to whisper among themselves, wondering if perhaps the humans had the right idea. The Aelari and their allies called emergency sessions, debating whether to impose sanctions on humanity or even launch a military response to bring the upstart species back under control. But even as they debated, reports came in from the outer rim. The Varax were regrouping, their hive queens calling more swarms from the depths of space, preparing for a counterattack in humanity. Rather than cowering in fear or begging for forgiveness, was already preparing its next move. The war had only begun, and Admiral Chun had no intention of stopping until the threat to his people was eliminated forever. Galaxy had wanted humanity to wait, to be patient, to trust in the wisdom of elder species who had forgotten what it meant to fight for survival. Now they would learn what happened when humans stopped waiting and started acting. The lesson would be written in fire across the stars, and no one would ever forget it. The galaxy had expected humanity to celebrate its victory at Helion 4, to rest on its laurels and return to the negotiating table with a stronger bargaining position, to behave the way civilized species were supposed to behave after winning a battle. The galaxy was wrong. 3 days after the battle, human fleets began moving deeper into the outer rim, not retreating to defensive positions, but advancing toward the Varax-held territory with a purpose that made Concord observers deeply uncomfortable. Admiral Chun stood at the center of the strategic command hub, surrounded by holographic displays showing the movement of human forces across a dozen star systems. We have confirmation that the Varax are massing their remaining swarms in the Keleth Nebula, Commander Park reported. Our intelligence suggests they have between 8 and 10,000 bioships remaining, with more being grown in the depths of their home systems. Chun studied the display, his mind working through the variables of a campaign that no human commander had ever attempted, not just defeating an enemy fleet, but systematically dismantling an entire species' capacity for war. If we give them time to regroup, they will adapt to our tactics, he said. The purifier will be less effective against bioships that have been modified to resist it, and our gravity wells will be countered by their organic engineers. He turned to face his commanders, men and women who had proven themselves in the fires of Helion 4 and were ready for whatever came next. We cannot give them that time, Chung continued. We must press our advantage now, hit them where they live, destroy their capacity to threaten humanity before they can recover. The offensive that followed would later be called the Campaign of Fire, and it would reshape the galaxy in ways that no one could have predicted. Human fleets struck Varax staging areas with surgical precision, using intelligence gathered by probes and captured drones to identify vulnerable targets and eliminate them before the swarm could respawn. Colony ships that had once carried human settlers to new worlds were converted into mobile assault platforms, their cargo holds filled not with families and dreams, but with weapons and soldiers and the grim determination of a species fighting for its survival. The Varax fought back, of course, throwing swarm after swarm against the human advance. But the tactics that had served them for millennia were useless against an enemy that refused to behave like prey. Human soldiers landed on infested worlds, fighting through nightmarish hive structures with weapons designed to burn and destroy, clearing colony after colony of the creatures that had consumed so many of their people. Veterans who had lost limbs in battle demanded prosthetics and returned to the front lines, their eyes filled with a cold fury that the Varax had never encountered in any of their previous conquest. Ships that should have been scrapped after suffering critical damage were patched together with welded metal and desperate engineering, their crews refusing to abandon the fight even when common sense demanded retreat. And through it all, the Galactic Concord watched in growing horror, realizing that they had badly miscalculated what humanity was capable of. Ambassador Elena Vasquez returned to the Grand Assembly, not as a humble petitioner begging for scraps of assistance, but as the representative of a species that had proven itself in the fires of war. The chamber felt different now. the ancient delegates watching her with expressions that ranged from fear to grudging respect to barely concealed hostility high. Counselor Vareth's frills flickered through a dozen different colors as Elena took her place at the center of the room. And for the first time since she had begun attending these sessions, he did not look amused. "Ambassador Vasquez," Vareth said, his voice carefully neutral. "The Concord has requested this meeting to discuss the ongoing situation in the Outer Rim." Elena smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. "I assume you mean the situation where humanity is doing what the Concord refused to do for 12,000 years, she said. "The situation where my people are dying by the thousands to eliminate a threat that you dismissed as a minor inconvenience." The Thelian delegate rumbled something that the translator rendered as concern. "The Concord does not dispute that the Varax threat was serious," the great stone creature said. "But the methods humanity has employed, the biological weapons, the antimatter munitions, the systematic destruction of Varax breeding grounds, these actions violate every principle of civilized warfare." Elena's expression hardened. "Civilized warfare," she repeated, her voice dripping with contempt. "You speak of civilized warfare while my people are being eaten alive by creatures that feel no pain and know no mercy, while human soldiers fight through horrors that would break the minds of your precious civilized species." She stepped forward, and something in her bearing made the nearest delegate shift uncomfortably. "Let me tell you about civilized warfare." "Aye, Counselor," Elena said. "On the colony world of New Harmony, the Varax captured a settlement of 30,000 people before we could evacuate them, and do you know what they did?" She pulled up a holographic display, and the images that appeared made several delegates look away in horror. "They kept them alive," Elena continued, her voice steady despite the nightmare on the screen. "They kept them alive and aware while they were slowly consumed over the course of weeks. Because fear makes the meat taste better to these creatures. Because suffering is a seasoning to the Varax." The display showed the rescue operation. Human soldiers finding survivors who had been partially eaten but kept alive by Varax biology. Men and women and children who would never recover from what had been done to them. This is what civilized species allowed to happen while they debated proper procedures, Elena said. "This is what the Concord enabled through its inaction. And now you dare to lecture us about the morality of our response?" The chamber fell silent, and for a long moment, no one spoke finally. Counselor Vareth broke the silence, his voice subdued in a way Elena had never heard before. "What does humanity want, Ambassador?" Elena turned to face him directly, and her expression was cold as the void between stars. "We want recognition as a full member of the Galactic Concord, with voting rights equal to any elder species," she said. "We want military autonomy, the right to defend our people without seeking permission from species who have proven they cannot be trusted to act when action is needed." She paused, letting her words sink in. "And we want an apology," she continued. "A formal apology, broadcast to every human colony, acknowledging that the Concord failed in its duty to protect member species and that its inaction contributed to the deaths of millions of innocent people." The Allery delegate's frills went pale, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "These demands are unprecedented, Ambassador, and no species has ever—" "So was the Varax swarm," Elena interrupted, her voice cutting through his protest like a blade. "So were the 47 million dead in our colonies. So was humanity being forced to fight alone against a threat that should have been the Concord's responsibility." She looked around the chamber at the ancient faces of beings who had ruled the galaxy for millennia. "You are welcome," she said, and the words carried a weight that made even the Thelian delegate flinch. The vote that followed was not unanimous, but it was decisive for the first time in the history of the Galactic Concord. A young species was granted full membership rights, and for the first time, the Assembly issued a formal apology admitting its failure to protect its members. It was a victory. But Elena did not celebrate. She knew that the war was not over, that human soldiers were still dying in the depths of Varax space, that the price of survival was still being paid in blood and sacrifice. But as she walked out of the Grand Assembly, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Humanity had asked for help, been refused, and succeeded anyway. The galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. And perhaps that was the greatest victory of all in the depths of space. Admiral Chun received the news of the diplomatic triumph with a nod of acknowledgement before turning his attention back to the tactical display. The campaign of fire was entering its final phase. And soon, the threat that had haunted humanity for so long would be eliminated forever. He had lost friends in this war. Good men and women who had given their lives so that others might live. And he would carry that weight for the rest of his days. But he would also carry the knowledge that their sacrifice had not been in vain. Humanity had proven itself, and the galaxy had learned a lesson it would never forget. The war was almost over, but the memory of what humans were capable of would echo through the stars for generations to come. The Varax home system had never been seen by any species outside the swarm. A dark cluster of dying stars surrounded by clouds of organic debris that stretched across light years of space for 10,000 years. The hive queens had ruled from this place, sending their children out to consume and grow and spread across the galaxy, secure in the knowledge that no enemy could ever reach them in their hidden stronghold. They were wrong. Operation Final Word began on the anniversary of the first Varax attack on human space, a date that Admiral Chun had chosen deliberately, a reminder to his troops of why they fought and what they were fighting for. The human fleet that emerged from hyperspace was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled, over 3,000 warships, carrying 500,000 soldiers, the combined might of a species that had been pushed to the edge and had pushed back. The Varax had gathered their remaining strength to defend their home. Billions of drones and thousands of bioships forming a living wall around the core systems where the hive queens dwelt. But humanity had not come to fight a battle. They had come to end a species. Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the tactical display as his fleet moved into position, and he felt the weight of history pressing down upon his shoulders. All ships report ready, Admiral, Commander Park announced, her voice carrying the same grim determination that filled every human soul in the fleet. Chun nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the display. Launch Operation Final Word. He said the attack came from every direction at once. Human warships punching through the Varax defensive line in a coordinated assault that the swarm's hive mind could not adapt to quickly enough. Antimatter munitions detonated in cascading waves, turning bioships into expanding clouds of superheated gas, and plasma lenses carved through organic armor like surgical tools cutting through diseased flesh. Human soldiers descended on the outer worlds of the Varax system in landing craft that bore the names of colonies the swarm had destroyed. New Harmony, Elysium, Hope's Landing, each name a memorial to the millions who had died. The fighting on those worlds was brutal beyond description. Soldiers pushing through tunnels of living tissue that pulsed and writhed around them, facing drones that fought with the mindless fury of creatures that knew only hunger and death. But humanity had learned from its early encounters with the swarm, had developed tactics and weapons and training that turned every human soldier into a walking nightmare for the creatures that had once considered them. Prey flamethrowers turned hive structures into infernos. Explosive charges collapsed tunnel networks that had taken centuries to grow, and the purifier spread through Varax biomass like a plague sent from some angry god. And at the center of it all, protected by the mass strength of the entire swarm, the hive queens waited in their spawning chambers, connected to every drone and every bioship through a psychic network that had sustained their species for millennia. Admiral Chun had studied that network, had learned its weaknesses from captured specimens and interrogated survivors. And he knew that destroying the queens was not enough. He needed to destroy the network itself, to sever the connection that allowed the Varax to coordinate and adapt and evolve. "Is the resonance bomb ready?" he asked, his voice calm despite the chaos of battle raging around his fleet commander. Park checked her displays and nodded. "The science team confirms it is ready for deployment, Admiral. But they want you to know that the effects on human psionics in the area could be unpredictable." Chun closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of the telepaths and empaths who served aboard his ships. Humans whose gifts had been a blessing and a burden throughout their lives. "Warn them to shield themselves as best they can," he said, and deployed the bomb. The resonance bomb was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It did not explode, did not burn, did not destroy physical matter. Instead, it emitted a pulse of psychic energy tuned to the exact frequency of the Varax hive mind, overwhelming the network with so much noise that the queens could no longer communicate with their children. The effect was instantaneous and devastating across the Varax home system. Drones that had been fighting with coordinated fury suddenly stopped, their movements becoming erratic and confused as the guidance of the queens was stripped away. Ships that had been executing complex tactical maneuvers began drifting aimlessly, their organic crews unable to function without the constant direction of the hive mind. And in the spawning chambers at the heart of the system, the hive queens felt something they had never experienced in their entire existence: silence. The absence of the billions of voices that had always filled their consciousness. Human assault teams breached the chambers within hours, fighting through the last desperate defenders to reach the creatures that had orchestrated the deaths of millions. The queens were massive, bloated things that had not moved from their spawning pools in centuries, their bodies designed only to breed and command. Vulnerable without the swarms that had always protected them, Admiral Chun himself led the final assault. Standing in the chamber of the primary queen, with a weapon in his hand and cold fury in his heart, Queen looked at him with compound eyes that had witnessed the consumption of 1,000 worlds. And for a moment, their minds touched through the dying remnants of the hive network. What Chun felt in that moment was not intelligence as he understood it, not consciousness or self-awareness, but something older and simpler: hunger, endless and eternal. A drive to consume and grow that had no beginning and could conceive of no end. And underneath that hunger, he felt something else: confusion, and perhaps the first stirrings of an emotion. The Varax had never needed to develop fear. "You came to our worlds and killed our people," Chun said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "You ate our children and laughed at our pain, and you thought we would simply accept it, that we would be like all the other species you have consumed throughout your history." He raised his weapon, and the primary queen made a sound that might have been a plea for mercy if such a concept existed in her alien mind. "You were wrong," Chum said, and pulled the trigger. The death of the primary queen sent a psychic shockwave through the remnants of the hive network, and across the Varax home system, billions of drones simply stopped moving without the queens to guide them, without the network to give them purpose. They wandered aimlessly through the ruins of their world, feeding when they stumbled upon food, dying when they could not within weeks. The Varax swarm had ceased to exist as a coordinated threat, reduced to scattered populations of mindless creatures that posed no more danger than any other wildlife. The war was over. The galaxy reacted to the news with a mixture of relief and terror, celebration and condemnation. Some species hailed humanity as saviors, the warriors who had ended a threat that the Concord had been unable or unwilling to face. Others called humans monsters, pointing to the weapons they had used and the systematic destruction they had unleashed, warning that a species capable of such things could not be trusted. The Galactic Concord debated for months about how to respond, some delegates calling for sanctions against humanity, while others argued for integration and cooperation in the end. They did nothing because they understood a truth that no one wanted to say out loud: humanity had won. And the galaxy would have to learn to live with what that meant. Admiral Marcus Chun retired a second time, returning to his farm on Earth with medals he never looked at and memories he could never forget. He died peacefully in his sleep 20 years later, surrounded by family members who knew him only as a quiet old man who grew excellent tomatoes and sometimes stared at the stars with an expression. They could not read. Ambassador Elena Vasquez left diplomatic service and settled on a quiet colony world. Far from the centers of galactic power, on her desk sat a plaque gifted to her by Admiral Chun on the day of his final retirement, engraved with the words that had started it all: "Fine, I will handle it myself." Beneath that, someone she never found out who had added in marker, "Last words of a bureaucracy." She smiled every time she looked at it, remembering the moment in the Grand Assembly when she had spoken those words, not knowing that they would change the galaxy forever. A new saying spread through trading posts and diplomatic halls in the years that followed, whispered by species who had learned the hard way what humanity was capable of: never corner a human, and never ignore their warnings. And if they say they will handle it themselves, pray to whatever gods you worship, because they will handle it, and you will not like how. The galaxy had learned its lesson, written in fire across the stars, and humanity had earned its place among the stars, not through patience or diplomacy, but through the oldest law of the universe: survival of those willing to fight for their existence. The stars themselves seemed brighter now. Or perhaps that was just the imagination of a species that had proven it belonged among them. Either way, humanity was home, and the galaxy would never forget the day they stopped asking for permission. The war was over, but the legend was only beginning.